Abandoned in the void. The escape pod tumbled through the endless black void, its thrusters long dead, its oxygen supply rapidly depleting. Inside, Kalen gasped for breath, his vision blurring as he clutched his side, where a deep gash leaked iridescent blood. His golden-hued scales shimmered weakly under the flickering emergency lights, a far cry from their usual radiant glow. The pain gnawed at him, but it was nothing compared to the betrayal that burned deeper than any wound. He had been left behind. Not by enemies, not by fate, but by his own people. The Zerethian Empire prided itself on strength, on unwavering discipline. To survive was to prove one's worth. To fall behind was to accept death. And Kylan, he had been deemed expendable. The attack had come fast. The enemy fleet, a ruthless force of unknown origin, had torn through Zerethian defenses like a blade through silk. Plasma fire ripped through the great warships, shattering their once impenetrable hulls. Kylan's vessel, the Zephyrian, had taken a direct hit. Flames, chaos, screaming. The bridge collapsed around him as he barely made it to an escape pod. He had expected to be retrieved. He had expected his people to fight for him. Instead, the command signal had come. Survivors are a liability. Better to let the void claim him. Kylan had sent out distress signals on every known frequency, his claws frantically working at the pod's failing controls. Silence. He cycled through every channel, but no one answered. The Varek warlords, whose mighty battleships patrolled the sector. They ignored him. The cold, calculating Synthari, who claimed to value intelligence above all else. No response. Even the supposedly peaceful Jaltun, who boasted of their universal compassion, had shut off their channels the moment his distress beacon pinged their systems. No one was coming. The pod's power flickered again, and a new, more chilling alert blared through the cabin. Oxygen critical. 7 minutes remaining. Kylan gritted his teeth, his reptilian heart pounding. Was this truly the end? Drifting through the emptiness of space, suffocating alone in the wreckage of his failure. No, he refused to die like this. With shaking hands, he reactivated the distress beacon one last time, knowing it was futile. The universe had already decided his fate. The void would take him. But then, the static on his console cleared. A new voice crackled through the failing speakers, strong and resolute, unlike the cold detachment he had come to expect. This is Commander Jensen of the UES Valkyrie. Hold on, we're coming for you. Kylan's breath hitched. Humans. He had heard of them. Distant newcomers to the galactic stage, often dismissed as insignificant. The Zerethians had never deemed them worthy of attention, let alone respect. They were primitive, reckless, too emotional for true strength. And yet, here they were, answering his call. His claws trembled as he struggled to respond. "This is Kylan of the Zerethian Empire," he rasped. "My vessel was destroyed. I require assistance." "Understood, Kylan," Jensen replied, his tone unwavering. "We're 20 minutes out. Hang in there." 20 minutes. Kylan's eyes flicked back to the oxygen warning. 6 minutes remaining. It wasn't enough time. He swallowed hard, mind racing. The humans might have answered his call, but they would arrive too late. He was still going to die. Unless. Gritting his teeth, Kylan forced himself upright, hissing in pain as his wound protested. He staggered toward the pod's emergency oxygen system. If he could reroute power from non-essential systems, he might buy himself a few more minutes. His claws danced across the controls, his training taking over as he worked. The console sputtered, flickered, then displayed new data. Emergency oxygen extension. 5 minutes. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. His breath was ragged as he collapsed against the seat, his strength failing. Outside the viewport, the void stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. His people had abandoned him. The galaxy had ignored him. But the humans, they were coming. And for the first time since the battle began, Kalen felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Hope. The humans arrive. The silence inside the escape pod was deafening. The only sound was Kylan's ragged breathing, growing fainter with each passing second. His vision blurred as his oxygen-starved body began shutting down. His golden-hued scales, once a mark of Zerithian pride, had dulled to a sickly bronze. His mind, sharp and disciplined all his life, now drifted toward the edge of unconsciousness. 5 minutes left. He forced his weary eyes toward the viewport. Space stretched infinitely in all directions, a sea of unfeeling darkness. No ships, no salvation. Maybe the humans wouldn't make it in time. He had been foolish to hope. Just as that thought settled in, a sudden burst of movement flickered in the distance. At first, it was nothing more than a speck, an anomaly against the backdrop of endless stars. But then it grew larger, clearer, moving at an incredible speed. The Valkyrie. Humans. Kylan's heart pounded sluggishly, a final surge of life rushing through his veins. The Valkyrie was smaller than a Zerithian warship, but something about its design radiated purpose. Its hull was a deep gunmetal gray, reinforced plating lining its structure like armor. The engines burned bright blue, cutting through the void with relentless determination. It was unlike anything Kylan had seen before, practical, resilient, undeniably human. Through the failing speakers, the voice returned, sharp and commanding. Kylan, we have visual on your pod. Prepare for docking. Commander Jensen. Kylan's limbs refused to move. His vision swam. 3 minutes left. A powerful metallic clank reverberated through the pod as the Valkyrie latched onto its exterior. The airlock engaged, hissing as pressurized systems connected. Shadows moved beyond the reinforced glass. And then, the hatch burst open. Light flooded the cramped space, and figures in sleek, battle-worn armor rushed inside. Humans. Their faces were partially obscured by helmets, but their movements were swift and precise. One of them, a female with a distinct red marking on her armor, immediately crouched beside Kylan, scanning him with a handheld device. He's got severe oxygen deprivation and internal bleeding, she reported. We need to move him now. Another figure, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, nodded. Understood. Jensen's waiting for us in the med bay. Let's go. Kylan wanted to protest, to assert his dignity, to insist that he could stand on his own. But as the female pressed a device to his arm, a sudden surge of warmth spread through his veins. His body, moments from collapse, surrendered to the human's technology. Darkness swallowed him whole. Kylan awoke to the rhythmic hum of machinery. The sharp scent of sterilized air filled his nostrils, and for the first time in hours, perhaps days, he could breathe freely. He was alive. Slowly, he turned his head, taking in his surroundings. The room was compact but efficient, lined with medical equipment far different from the biochambers of his people. The bed beneath him adjusted automatically as he moved, responding to his weight shifts. A translucent display hovered above him, showing his vitals. His oxygen levels had stabilized, his wound had been treated, and his body was responding to some form of foreign medicine. Human medicine. Glad to see you're awake, a voice said. Kylan's gaze snapped to the source. A man stood near the doorway, arms crossed, a confident smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His uniform bore the insignia of the United Earth Fleet, and his dark eyes studied Kylan with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Commander Jensen. Kylan's throat was dry, but he managed a single word. Why? Jensen's brow furrowed slightly. Why what? Kylan exhaled slowly. Why did you save me? Jensen tilted his head, as if the question itself was absurd. Because you needed help. Kylan narrowed his eyes. My distress signal was sent to every species in this sector. None responded. Jensen leaned against the wall, his expression darkening. Yeah, we noticed. There was something unsettling in his tone. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper. Disappointment. Disgust. Kylan wasn't sure. You risked your ship, Kylan pressed. Your crew. For me. Azarithian. Jensen sighed. Listen, Kylan. I don't give a damn who you are, or where you come from. You were stranded, dying, and we had the means to help. That's all that mattered. Kylan was silent. Zarethian doctrine was built on strength, on survival of the fittest. To be left behind was natural. Expected. The idea that a species would go out of their way to help a stranger without any gain, without any obligation, it was incomprehensible. And yet, the evidence was all around him. They had treated his wounds. They had stabilized his vitals. They had given him a second chance. Kylan had spent his entire life believing that the strong thrived and the weak perished. But these humans, they defied that logic. And he wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. Jensen pushed off the wall. Rest up. We'll talk more when you're ready. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Welcome aboard the Valkyrie, Kylan. Then he was gone, leaving Kylan alone in a world he did not understand. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly weak. The nature of strength. Kylan remained motionless in the sterile infirmary, his mind racing. He was alive when he shouldn't be. The Valkyrie's crew had saved him, despite having no reason to. Zarethian logic dictated that every action required justification. They had no alliance with humans, no treaties, no shared history. His people had even clashed with them on the edges of the Orion Rift. Minor skirmishes, but enough to classify them as potential threats. And yet, these humans had risked themselves for him without hesitation. It made no sense. A soft chime broke the silence, followed by the automated door sliding open. The female medic from before entered, carrying a small tray of nutrient packs. She had removed her helmet, revealing shoulder-length auburn hair tied into a tight braid. Her sharp green eyes studied him as she approached. You're recovering fast, she said, her tone neutral. I wasn't sure how your body would react to our treatment, but you're stabilizing. Kylan sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his limbs. His body had been through hell. And yet, here he was. He eyed the tray she set down beside him. You healed me, he stated, despite not knowing how my biology would respond. She arched an eyebrow. You say that like it's strange. Kylan hesitated. It is. The woman, her uniform identified her as Lieutenant Calla Morgan, sighed and crossed her arms. If we only saved people when it was convenient, we wouldn't be here at all. We do what we can when we can. Simple as that. Simple. Nothing about this was simple. He reached for one of the nutrient packs, examining the unfamiliar symbols on the packaging before cautiously biting into it. The taste was tolerable. He chewed thoughtfully. You seem confused, Calla observed. I do not understand your people. She smirked. You're not the first alien to say that. Kylan swallowed and met her gaze. Strength determines worth. The weak are cast aside. It is the way of my people. Calla's expression darkened. That's the way of a lot of species. But we don't work like that. He studied her, intrigued. Then what do humans believe strength is? Calla leaned against the infirmary's console, considering her words. Strength isn't about abandoning the weak, she said. It's about lifting them up. It's about choosing to help when you don't have to. Strength is resilience, adaptability, the ability to stand back up after you've been knocked down. She glanced at him. Your people see strength as power. We see it as endurance. Kylan sat in silence, digesting her words. Before he could respond, the comm system activated. All crew to the briefing room. We have incoming hostiles. Jensen's voice. Calla shot him a look. Stay here. We'll handle it. And then she was gone. Kylan couldn't stay put. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the lingering pride of a Zarethian warrior, or perhaps it was the gnawing need to understand these humans. But moments after Calla left, he swung his legs over the bed and stood. His limbs protested, but he pushed forward. Exiting the infirmary, he followed the sound of voices until he reached the ship's briefing room. A holographic projection hovered in the center, displaying a tactical map of the sector. 3 crimson blips approached the Valkyrie's position. Jensen stood at the forefront, flanked by his officers. "They're fast," a crew member reported. "Signatures match Cell-Airy Raider-class ships." Kylan stiffened. Pirates. The Cell-Airy were scavengers, a nomadic species that thrived on ambush tactics. They were ruthless in battle, preying on stranded ships and stripping them for resources. Jensen's gaze darkened. "Do we have a comm link with them?" "Open," another crew member confirmed. Jensen crossed his arms. "Let's see what they want." The holographic display flickered, replaced by the grotesque, insectoid features of its Cell-Airy captain. Its multifaceted eyes glowed amber, mandibles clicking in amusement. "Humans," it hissed. "Surrender your ship, and we may let you live." Jensen smirked. "Tempting offer, but we're not interested." The Cell-Airy captain's mandibles twitched. "You have something valuable on board." Jensen's expression remained unreadable. "Oh, and what would that be?" The captain chittered. "A Zerithian." Silence fell over the room. Kylan's breath caught. Jensen didn't even glance his way. "Sorry to disappoint, but no Zerithians here. Just a bunch of stubborn humans who don't take kindly to threats." The Cell-Airy captain tilted its head. "Then you will die." The transmission cut off. A tense pause settled over the crew before Jensen turned to his officers. "All right, let's make this quick." Orders were given, stations were manned, and the Valkyrie prepared for combat. Kylan watched it all unfold, a growing unease settling in his chest. He wasn't used to seeing a ship this small stand against 3 enemy raiders. Any Zerithian commander would retreat, seeing the fight as unwinnable. But these humans, they didn't run. They faced the threat head-on. And as alarms blared, and the ship shook with the first impact, Kylan began to wonder. The strength of the few. The Valkyrie rocked under the first impact, a deep shudder reverberating through its hull as Kylan gripped the metal railing for support. The ship's alarm system blared, bathing the room in red warning lights. Shield holding at 73%. Someone called out from the bridge console. Jensen's jaw tightened as he stood at the center of the command deck, feet planted firm, gaze locked on the display of their attackers. 3 Cell-Airy Raider-class vessels, each twice the size of the Valkyrie, moved with the aggression of starving beasts. And yet, not a single human moved to retreat. Kylan's instincts screamed at him. 3 against 1 was a death sentence, but the humans didn't falter. They weren't panicked. Instead, they worked with precise efficiency, as if they had rehearsed battles like this 100 times over. "They're trying to push us toward the asteroid field," Kala reported. Jensen scoffed. "Amateurs. Move us into the field." The crew obeyed without hesitation. Kylan's brow furrowed. They were willingly entering the debris field. It was suicidal. No Zerithian commander would ever risk such a maneuver. The asteroids were unpredictable, an uncontrollable variable that could spell disaster in an engagement. But as the ship veered into the field, Kylan saw something remarkable. The humans weren't afraid of chaos. They thrived in it. The Cell-Airy followed, but immediately their formation faltered. Their larger ships struggled to maneuver, while the Valkyrie slipped between the rocks with practiced ease. "They're adjusting course," Kala noted. "Predictable," Jensen muttered. "Target their lid ship. Fire when ready." A pulse of energy rippled through the Valkyrie's hull as its main cannons unleashed a concentrated blast. The shot struck true, slamming into the first Cell-Airy ship and sending it spiraling. Kylan watched in astonishment as the humans exploited the chaos with surgical precision. No wasted movement. No blind aggression. They fought intelligently. The Cell-Airy, in contrast, scrambled to reposition, trying to force their way through the debris field. But in their desperation, one of their ships clipped an asteroid. The impact tore through its hull, leaving it vulnerable. Jensen seized the opportunity instantly. Focus fire. The Valkyrie's cannons roared again. The weakened Acceleri ship erupted in a violent explosion, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. Kalen exhaled slowly. 1 down, 2 to go. The battle raged on, each passing second an intricate dance of fire and steel. The remaining Acceleri ships adapted, their weapons locking onto the Valkyrie. Plasma fire streaked through space, narrowly missing the ship's hull as the humans executed impossibly tight evasive maneuvers. Shields at 40%. Brace for impact. The next blast struck hard. Kylan felt the ship lurch violently, throwing him against the console. Sparks erupted from an overhead panel. "We've lost primary thrusters," someone yelled. Jensen didn't hesitate. "Switch to emergency propulsion. Keep us moving." Kylan staggered to his feet, his Zerithian reflexes keeping him balanced. He had seen countless battles, but this was different. These humans fought with everything, not just brute force, but strategy, adaptability, and sheer refusal to die. And they did it together. He had been raised to believe that true strength was individual dominance, but watching this crew, he saw something he had never considered. Strength could be collective. Was this why the humans survived wars they should have lost? Was this why they endured where others fell? The ship trembled again, but the humans pressed on. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. A desperate gamble. "We've got one shot at this," Jensen said. The last 2 Acceleri ships regrouped, sensing the damage the Valkyrie had sustained. They weren't playing defensively anymore. They were moving in for the kill. Jensen glanced at his crew. "We lure them in, make them think we're vulnerable. Then we hit them with everything we got." Kala nodded. The classic wounded prey trick. Exactly. Kylan's eyes narrowed. "That is dangerous." Jensen smirked. "That's war." The ship's engines flickered, feigning a system's failure. The humans pretended to struggle, adjusting their flight path just enough to make it look like they were out of options. The Acceleri took the bait, accelerating straight toward them. "Wait for it," Jensen murmured. The Acceleri ships drew closer. Kylan tensed. Any moment now, and they'd be within striking range. And then, now, the Valkyrie spun violently, angling its remaining weapons at the first Acceleri ship. A coordinated barrage of firepower erupted, striking directly at its engines. The enemy vessel didn't even have time to evade before it was torn apart in a spectacular explosion. The remaining Acceleri ship hesitated, just long enough for the Valkyrie to adjust its position and launch a final, concentrated strike. The enemy vessel detonated, its fiery remains scattering into the asteroid field. Silence. The battle was over. Jensen exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Status. Kala checked the readouts. Shields critical. Minor damage to the left hull. But we're intact. A victorious cheer rose from the crew, and for the first time, Kylan understood them. They shouldn't have won. The odds had been against them. But these humans, they refused to lose. They had no genetic superiority, no overwhelming firepower, just sheer, unrelenting will. Kylan had never seen anything like it. Jensen turned to him. "You still think strength is about abandoning the weak?" Kylan met his gaze, and for the first time, he wasn't sure how to answer. "The fire that burns within." The Valkyrie drifted through the asteroid field, its engines humming softly as the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage sustained in the battle. The red emergency lights had dimmed, replaced by the steady blue glow of operational systems coming back online. Kylan sat in silence, watching from the observation deck as debris from the destroyed Acceleri ships floated past. He had fought in wars. He had seen fleets clash and civilizations crumble. But never had he witnessed a battle quite like the one he had just survived. Humans had no genetic superiority, no overwhelming technology. They had no reason to win against a force like the Acceleri. And yet they had. Not by brute strength, not by sheer numbers, but by something deeper, something he couldn't define. His gaze shifted toward the bridge, where the human crew moved with practiced efficiency. They weren't celebrating, not in the way he had seen Zerithian victors boast after a battle. There were no cries of superiority, no declarations of dominance. Instead, they worked together, patching systems, checking on the wounded, making sure the ship could fly again. Because their fight was never about proving their own strength, it was about survival. And survival meant protecting each other. For a Zerithian, such a concept was foreign. Killen had been raised to believe that the strong stood alone, that to need others was to be weak. His people only cooperated when it was strategically beneficial. But these humans, they didn't just cooperate. They trusted. A quiet voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You've been awful quiet, Kylan." He turned to see Jensen leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his usual smirk replaced by something more subdued. Kylan exhaled. "I am thinking." Jensen chuckled. "I can see that." He stepped forward, standing beside Kylan as they looked out at the stars. "You had your doubts about us. You still do, don't you?" Kylan hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I do not doubt your effectiveness, but I do not understand it." Jensen raised an eyebrow. "What don't you understand?" Kylan's jaw tightened as he searched for the right words. "Humans should not have won that battle. Your ship was smaller. Your weapons were weaker. Your enemy had every advantage. And yet, you prevailed." Jensen shrugged. "Yeah, sounds about right." Kylan narrowed his eyes. "You say that as if it is normal." "Because it is," Jensen replied. He turned to face Kylan fully. "You Zerithians think strength is about being the biggest, the strongest, the most advanced. You think it's about standing above everyone else, proving you don't need anyone. But humans," he tapped his chest, "we don't fight that way. We don't just rely on weapons or numbers. We rely on each other." Kylan frowned. "And that is why you win." Jensen nodded. "Part of it. But there's something else too." He gestured toward the ship. "This crew, they're not just soldiers. They're people. People with families, dreams, things they're willing to fight and die for. Every time we go into battle, we know what's at stake. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for the ones we love. That's why we win. Because we refuse to let each other fall." Kylan stared at him, something deeply unsettling shifting in his chest. It was not that he disagreed. It was that, for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong his entire life. Rebuilding and reflection. The next several hours were spent repairing the ship, recalibrating systems, and tending to the wounded. Kylan offered his assistance where he could, though he often found himself watching more than acting. He watched as Kala worked tirelessly alongside the engineers, her hands moving with precision as she rewired damaged circuits. He watched as the medics treated the injured, speaking to them with a warmth and kindness that felt unnatural to them. Zerithians did not waste time comforting the wounded, but the humans did, and it made them stronger. And he watched as Jensen moved through the ship, checking on every single crew member, not as their commander, but as their comrade. No one was left behind. No one was forgotten. Kylan thought back to his own people, to the Zerithian warriors who would have abandoned the weak without hesitation. He thought of the countless battles he had fought, where survival meant proving oneself worthy by stepping over the fallen. Was that truly strength? Or was this, this unity, this unwavering refusal to abandon each other, the real strength? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he was beginning to understand the question. A new mission. Later, as the ship moved away from the asteroid field, Jensen called the crew together for a briefing. The XLR were defeated, but the mission wasn't over. "We still have a long way to go," Jensen said, standing at the center of the room. "We were supposed to be part of a larger operation, That operation failed. We're alone now." The crew was silent. They all knew what that meant. The mission had originally been part of a larger fleet effort to push into enemy-controlled territory. But with the other ships destroyed, the Valkyrie was the only one left. It was one ship against an empire. And yet, not a single person backed down. Jensen exhaled. "We have two choices. We turn back, regroup, and hope for reinforcements. Or we move forward, complete the mission ourselves, and show that HFY that humanity doesn't break." He looked around the room. "I'm not giving orders on this one. We decide together." Kylan's chest tightened as he watched the humans exchange glances, then one by one nod in agreement. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. And yet, they chose to fight. Kylan had never seen anything like it. He stepped forward before he could stop himself. "I will go with you." Jensen's brow lifted. "You sure about that?" Kylan hesitated, then nodded. "I do not know if I understand humans, but I know this. If there is a chance to see more of this strength, to learn from it, I would be a fool to turn away." Jensen grinned. "Well then, welcome to the crew, Kylan." The room erupted in cheers. Kylan did not cheer. He did not yet know how to be like them. But for the first time, he wanted to learn. And that, he realized, was the first step. The unbreakable flame. The Valkyrie surged through the darkness, a lone ember against the vastness of space. Damaged but determined, it pressed forward toward a fate that no one, not even its crew, could predict. Kylan stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays flicker with data. The HFY stronghold was still several light years away, a fortress world, its defenses vast and impenetrable. And yet, the humans refused to turn back. Jensen leaned over the holotable, analyzing the readouts with a quiet intensity. Kala stood beside him, arms crossed, her sharp gaze scanning the reports. The rest of the crew worked in tense silence. Kylan had seen war councils before. He had witnessed Zerithian strategists dissect battlefields with ruthless efficiency, their decisions devoid of hesitation or emotion. But this was different. "All right," Jensen said finally, tapping a section of the display. "We can't take that fortress head-on. We don't have the numbers. But what if we don't hit it head-on?" Kala's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting infiltration." Jensen smirked. "I'm suggesting a miracle." Kylan folded his arms. "Explain." Jensen turned toward him. "You told us before that HFY warships don't just defend their strongholds. They're part of them. Their stations are living extensions of their fleet, right?" Kylan nodded. "Correct. Their defenses are a single entity reacting together. Their response time is near instantaneous." Jensen's smirk widened. "Yeah, which is why we need to break that link." Kala blinked. "You want to cut off their warships from the fortress." "Exactly," Jensen said. "They rely on unity. Their coordination is their greatest strength. But if we can disrupt their link, throw their fleet into chaos, they won't be able to stop us." Kylan's mind raced. It was a gamble. A desperate, reckless human plan. But it could work. Jensen looked around the bridge. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and we're flying straight into the lion's den. But I need to know." He met their eyes, one by one. "Are we doing this?" No hesitation. One by one, the crew nodded. Kylan felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, he did not feel like an outsider. He felt like part of something greater. The infiltration begins. Hours later, the Valkyrie dropped out of hyperspace just outside the HFY fortress system. A silent world hung before them, a metal giant wrapped in layers of energy shields, pulsating turrets, and docking bays that could unleash an entire armada in seconds. Kylan had fought alongside HFY forces before. He knew what they were capable of. No one had ever taken one of their fortress worlds. Yet, here they were, about to try. Jensen's voice crackled over the comms. "All right, team. You know the plan. We slip past the outer defenses, make it to the control hub, and sever the neural link between the fleet and the fortress. No link, no coordination. Kylan secured his combat gear. And if we fail? Jensen grinned. Then we die trying. Kylan exhaled. Humans. He was beginning to understand them. Storming the gates. The infiltration team. Jensen, Kala, Kylan, and a handful of elite crew members boarded a small stealth shuttle, breaking away from the Valkyrie under the cover of a passing asteroid field. Sensors silent. Engines whisper quiet. They slipped through the planetary defenses like ghosts, navigating past patrol ships and automated sentries until they reached a weak point in the fortress hull. A docking port. Unshielded. Exposed. Breach in 3, 2. A controlled explosion tore through the metal plating, and the team rushed inside. Zelleri guards turned in alarm. Too slow. Kylan's plasma blade cut through the first. Jensen's rifle put down the second. Kala's combat drone sent a third sprawling. Silent. Efficient. Deadly. They moved through the corridors, bypassing security systems, cutting down resistance where necessary. The Zelleri were strong, but they had never fought humans like these. Kylan marveled at the way they fought. Jensen with his relentless speed, dodging and weaving between enemy fire. Kala with her calculated precision, every shot deliberate, every strike measured. And the others, working in perfect sync, moving as one. Not as warriors, as a pack. He had always believed strength was about standing alone. But now he saw the truth. Strength was never about standing alone. It was about standing together. The core and the countdown. They reached the fortress control hub, a vast chamber pulsing with neural energy conduits. This was the heart of the Zelleri coordination network. And it was heavily guarded. A dozen Zelleri warriors stood between them and victory. The air hummed with energy. Jensen smirked. All right, boys and girls, let's do what humans do best. Kala cracked her knuckles. Break things. Exactly. The fight was brutal. Plasma bolts streaked across the chamber. Blades clashed. The Zelleri fought with their usual calculated precision, but something was different. They were losing. For the first time in their existence, they could not predict the outcome. Humans were not predictable. Humans were chaos, and chaos could not be controlled. Kylan tore through the last warrior, panting as the final body hit the ground. Jensen sprinted to the console, slamming a hacking device into the system. Kala. Status. Link severance in 30 seconds. Kylan turned to Jensen. And the fortress defenses. Jensen grinned. They're about to lose their eyes, ears, and brains all at once. The fortress trembled. Outside, the Zelleri fleet staggered. Their coordination collapsed. Their warships, once synchronized like a perfect machine, spiraled into confusion. And then, the humans struck. The Valkyrie led the charge, rallying nearby resistance forces to launch a devastating counterattack. The Zelleri Empire had never known fear. Until now. A warrior's choice. The mission was complete. The stronghold lay in ruins, its defenses shattered. The Zelleri were retreating. Running. Jensen clapped Kylan on the back. Told you we'd do it. Kylan exhaled. It was impressive. Jensen grinned. Admit it. You're starting to like us. Kylan didn't answer immediately. For so long, he had believed strength was about domination. That war was about proving oneself superior. But now he saw the truth. Strength was not about standing alone. It was about standing together. And in that moment, he made his choice. He would not return to the Zerithians. He would not fight for an empire that only valued strength for its own sake. He would fight for this, for humanity, for the fire that could never be extinguished. Jensen extended a hand. So, you sticking around? Kylan clasped his wrist. I am. and he had never been more certain of anything in his life. A fire that never dies. The HFY had fallen. The once mighty fortress world now drifted in space like a hollowed-out husk, its defenses shattered, its fleets scattered. The unthinkable had happened. Humanity had stood against the galactic overlords, and won. But the war was far from over. The Valkyrie hovered in the aftermath, its hull scorched, its systems barely holding together. On its bridge, Jensen stood at the helm, staring at the tactical readouts with a grim expression. "We bought ourselves time," he muttered. "But that's all this was. A warning shot. The HFY aren't going to take this lying down." Kala crossed her arms. "No, they'll be back. And next time, they won't underestimate us." Kylan stood by the viewport, gazing at the wreckage of HFY warships drifting through the void. He had fought alongside them once. He had believed they were unbeatable, that their dominion over the galaxy was inevitable. Not anymore. He turned to the crew, the people he had fought beside, blood beside, become one of. "What's our next move?" he asked. Jensen exhaled. "We rally. We build. We get ready for the war that's coming." Kylan considered this. The Zerithians had always spoken of war as a thing of necessity, a test of strength, a means to an end. But humans fought differently. They did not fight because they were forced to. They fought because they chose to. For their families, for their homes, for the simple, unshakable belief that no tyrant had the right to rule over others. Kylan had never fought for something greater than himself. Until now. A galaxy awakens. The fall of the HFY fortress world sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Rebel factions across the outer rim, long thought crushed under the HFY boot, rose up in defiance. Slave races, who had spent generations believing that resistance was futile, began to fight back. Even among the great galactic powers, whispers spread. The impossible had happened. Humans had shattered the illusion of HFY invincibility. Now, everyone was watching. Some in fear, some in hope. But no one could ignore the truth anymore. Humanity was no longer just a backwater species, insignificant and weak. They were a force. And they were just getting started. The Council of the Doomed. In the heart of the HFY dominion, deep within a colossal spire that stretched into the storm-filled skies of their homeworld, the High Council convened. The chamber was vast, lined with ancient glyphs that pulsed with blue fire. At its center stood the Elder Sovereign, a being who had ruled for longer than any living species could remember. His silver eyes burned with fury as he watched the battle footage replay in the air before him. The Valkyrie, the humans, the Zerithian traitor. The other counselors, warlords of 1,000 conquered systems, stood in tense silence. "They should not have been capable of this," one of them hissed. "They are primitives, anomalies. They are humans," another growled. "We have underestimated them. That was our first mistake." The Elder Sovereign's gaze darkened. "Then we will not make a second." A hologram flickered to life before him. An image of a planet bathed in blue and green. Earth. A death sentence. "Destroy them," he ordered. "Erase their world from existence." The counselors bowed. The command was given. The extermination of humanity had begun. The race against time. Aboard the Valkyrie, alarms blared. Jensen bolted to the command deck, half-dressed, pulling his jacket over his shoulders as Kala barked orders to the crew. "What's going on?" he demanded. Kala's face was pale. "We intercepted a transmission." She tapped a button, and the message played over the speakers. HFY forces mobilizing. Coordinates, Sol system. Jensen's blood turned to ice. "They're going after Earth." The bridge fell silent. For all their victories, for all their defiance, this was the nightmare scenario. Kylan clenched his fists. "They are not merely retaliating. They are wiping out your species." Jensen inhaled sharply, then nodded. "We have to warn them." Kala checked the navigation charts. Even at full speed, we'll never make it before them. Then we don't beat them to Earth, Jensen said. We beat them on Earth. The crew exchanged glances. It was a suicide mission. An entire Cell-Area invasion fleet against one ship. And yet, not one of them hesitated. Prepare for hyperspace jump, Jensen ordered. We're going home. The battle for Earth. When the Valkyrie emerged from hyperspace, Earth was already under siege. Cell-Area warships blotted out the sky, descending like a swarm of locusts. Cities burned. Defense systems struggled to hold the line. Humanity's fleets, outnumbered and outgunned, were losing. Jensen clenched his jaw. Open a channel to all forces. The comms officer nodded. You're live. Jensen took a breath. This is Commander Jensen of the Valkyrie. I don't care who you are. If you're still breathing, if you're still fighting, you're one of us. The Cell-Area think they can wipe us out. They think this is the end. He looked out at the chaos, at the inferno raging across his homeworld. They're wrong. This isn't the end. He turned to his crew. This is the beginning. And then the last stand of humanity began. The final choice. The battle raged for hours. The Valkyrie fought like a beast against the storm, its guns tearing through Cell-Area ships, its engines pushing past the limits of what should have been possible. Kylan was in the thick of it, leading boarding assaults against enemy dreadnoughts, cutting down Cell-Area warriors who had once been his allies. Jensen and Kala fought side by side, their movements a dance of survival and destruction. But it wasn't enough. Earth was crumbling. The Cell-Area fleet was too vast. And then, a signal. One by one, human ships began jumping in from every corner of the galaxy. The rebels, the outcasts, the species who had once been too afraid to stand. They had seen what humanity had done. They had seen hope. And now, they had come to fight. The tide turned. The Cell-Area, for the first time in their existence, knew fear. And Kylan, as he fought among humans, as he stood with them, knew one thing with absolute certainty. The fire of humanity would never die. Epilogue. The legend begins. The battle for Earth became legend. Humanity did not just survive. They became something greater. A force that could not be conquered. A fire that could not be extinguished. And Kylan, once an outsider, once an enemy, had become one of them. The first of many.